Hi everyone. Every modern theory in some way acts like a gunman trying to find out some hidden anarchist in a certain book. And we as readers and critics dissect a book wanting to see whether there is any reference to race, class or gender. This is how we are reading texts today. Now it depends to us as to how we evolve with our conclusions, whether this is a kind of a literary deterioration or whether we are approaching literature from a modern approach. It all depends how we read and perceive the theories. Let us just brief the theories. So we began with new criticism with T.S. Eliot, Lewis and Richards, who said that a text and author should be separated. So read a text very independently. And then came structuralism of Ferdinand de Saussure, who said the text is all a game of the signified, signifier and the sign, and with the binary oppositions you people end with no meaning at all, rather with so many meanings. And then came the post-structuralism, wherein we had Foucault, who said, where lies the meaning in the text? You should first see what is not there in the text and then you will find what is there in the text. So how confusing. And then you come up to deconstruction of Derrida, who came from a very philosophical background. He was a professor in philosophy, who says that where is the center in the book and where is the meaning in the book that you're trying to find. So you have multiple layers of meaning in the book for which you have to reconstruct a book into so many elements and then find out where the meaning is. In all these theories, the text is separated from the author. And then came the new historicism, which suddenly turned a view from all these theories. It said, how can you separate a text from its author? So you not only have to study the author's context, but also the critic's context, and then come out with a core text. So it is suddenly a shift from structuralism, post-structuralism, deconstruction to new historicism that says you can't separate a text and its author, so you have to bring it together and then study. So it is in new historicism that there is a wide space for all the scholars from various social sciences to come and comment on literature. So it is here that the area of literature gets hybridized. In the sense, anybody from sociology or from psychology or from cultural studies comes and comments over a work of art. This is because we have ourselves welcomed them. So after that, to a strange theory, Orientalism, that is what we are going to discuss today. It also speaks something different from all these theories again. So this is how theory after theory, apart from all these theories, we have the feminist theory, we have the gender studies, we have the psychoanalytical theory, so many theories cropping up today. But today our focus will be on Orientalism. So now let us pick the origin of the word. So Orient is a Latin word, oriens. It means of all those countries where the sun rises early. Then Oceans, that means of the west, where you have the sunset, that is where the sun rises quite late. So you have Oriental countries and you have Occidental countries. So which are the Oriental countries? You have to make three parts again. The Middle East and then Asia and then Africa. So in the Middle East, you have the entire Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran and the entire Egypt. And in Asia, as we all belong to Asia, of course, India, China, Japan and so on and so forth. And then when you come to Africa, all those African countries which were colonized and which suffered poverty to the max, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Lebanon, so on, Congo and so forth. So this is how we have the Oriental countries. And then which are the Occidental countries? The entire West, that is the European countries plus America. So this is how these two terms you have to understand before understanding Orientalism. Now, before coming to the word Orientalism, we will know who Orientalists are. All those writers and artists who wrote, in multi-dimensional aspects about the Eastern people or the Eastern concepts, about the Orients. Orients are not the people belonging from the East. Orientalists are those writers and artists who wrote in multi-dimensional aspects about the Orients, about the people belonging to the East. How did they write it? Because they knew the culture and the languages of the Orients of the East. And here I am referring most of the times to the Islamic Arab world more than the Asia or Africa, referring more to the Islamic Arab world. Okay, these artists, so how did they go and study all that? So these writers or artists had personal experiences of those areas, one thing, or they depended on the works or reports or articles of the East India Company officials who were already there in the Islamic world, were already there in India and the Asian countries. So whatever manuals they produced, depending upon that, this is a kind of a secondary knowledge. So primary knowledge of the Orientalists was very less, because not all of the Orientalist writers went to the Eastern countries and came up with their books. They depended on the officials of the East India Company, like whom? Like you have Macaulay, who introduced the modern education system in India. Like you have William Jones, you have Bentinck, you have also Rudyard Kipling, and many others who wrote about the Indian culture. So if you have also studied, I have also studied, but we did have that kind of an outlook till date. For example, we have studied Swift, we have studied Conrad, and we have studied T.S. Eliot, we have studied Ralph Waldo Emerson, many such writers in whom reference of the East comes, but we have never thought critically whether it was a kind of a personal opinion, had they been there, or this opinion depended on some other's opinion. So this is all kind of a confusion. Let us just pick the word Orientalists. Orientalists are writers or painters, artists, or those who study the Eastern cultures, who wrote about the East depending on two things. Either they had a personal knowledge of that, or they depended on the official books of the East India Company. So this is how you came to know about Orients, Occidents, then you came to Oriental countries, Occidental countries, then you came to the phrase Orientalists as a group, and now you will come from where did this word Orientalism take birth. So actually we have the Latin word, Latin origin for that. But then this was quite a new word. Orientalism had not existed. So this was a book written by a Palestine by birth. He was a professor in American University called Edward Said. In 1978, he came up with a very controversial book called Orientalism, and it is from this title that we have picked up the theory today, Orientalism. So what is there in his book? We will also deal afterwards, but now to brief it out, in Orientalism you have all those interpretations of the West scholars and all these interpretations of the East that they have mentioned in their books are being studied by Edward Said and being reported in his book Orientalism. So what is that he reports? All that the Orientalists wrote about the Eastern people, especially the Islamic Arabic people, were based on their prejudices. And what were the prejudices of the Orientalists? That this Middle East or the Eastern sphere, or what you call the Oriental atmosphere or environment or countries, are savage, are primitive, are pagan, are underdeveloped, are criminal, and they are needing reform. So this was a kind of an approach of the Orientalists towards the Eastern. It is not a kind of fantasy for us now. We have to have an in-depth knowledge as to why they considered the East like that. It was a kind of a saying in the works of the Oriental paintings and also in their books that we did not simply go and invade them or make them our colony. They were literally inviting us to come and reform them. So this is the kind of thing that is being written in the Oriental literature. Then what exactly do these books written by the Orientalists want to prove? They want to take for granted the white supremacy, and they want to establish the European universalism. So somewhere Edward Said in his book Orientalism says that they have literally underestimated the Islamic Arab world and also the entire Oriental atmosphere. So the basis that they have, the foundations that they have for their work must be studied, must be critically studied. It's now high time. This is what a kind of a rebellious attitude that is seen in Edward Said's book Orientalism. Now, what exactly made Edward Said do all this? So, we will have a kind of a brief discussion of who this Edward Said was. Edward Said was born in 1935 in Palestine. He was born to a Jewish couple, but they were converted into Christianity, and a little bit of schooling was done in Palestine. But that was a time when America wanted to divide that area into Arab and Jewish areas. So it was such kind of a flux that the father had to take the family and shift to Cairo. So from Palestine, Edward Said at a very young age shifted to Cairo, and then a little bit of living here and there in Lebanon also. And after having the, look at the progress, shifts in his life. Palestine, then Cairo, then Lebanon, and then suddenly his father was a rich businessman, of course. He did not suffer any poverty, but then a lot of shifting was there in Edward Said's life. His education was also going on very well. He studied in British schools, established schools, and then immediately he wanted to, as a businessman initially, wanted to join the army in America. So what happened? They had to immigrate from Cairo to America. So as he went to America, he studied in Princeton University and then also Columbia University. What happened there is he mentions about the cultural shift that he had. It was such a troublesome atmosphere for him that you have loved your native so much and you have so much of faith on the native culture. You know how rich your native culture is, how your people are, you've been with them, and suddenly when you shift to America and then you witness on TV news that so many different things about the Arab world, so many different things about Israel and Palestine are being talked. And this is how Edward, as a scholar initially in his college days, was affected by the media of America. Then he started studying as to what is this, a sudden shift. People there do not know what America thinks about them. And these people keep on talking so much without the knowledge of literally what is the sacredness of the culture of Arab or the Palestine. So this is what happened in Edward Said's life, and he became a professor. He was a PhD in English literature, and as he taught literature, he started teaching in this manner. He began with a kind of a cultural study in his profession also, and then he came across many readings and he published many papers, was quite controversial. Slowly he worked on so many articles already published in America here and there. Out of fear those papers were not published, but then he was such a man that he bombarded the American psyche and the entire West psyche with his book Orientalism in 1978. So now, what inspired? Was it that easy to talk about the Western, so ill about the Western colonization and how they were wanting to spoil the native culture of the Islamic Arab world? So this was not that easy for him. So he had studied deeply, and the two major influences that you have in Edward Said's book Orientalism is one from Antonio Gramsci's cultural hegemony, and then you have Foucault's power knowledge relation. So these two aspects we will slowly discuss, because this is what we see in Orientalism as a theory. This is what kind of approach we have to have for those books that we pick up for study under the title Orientalism. So we know Marx, so his social constructs, his proletariat, his bourgeois theory, we all know that it was quite Russian, it was quite communist in approach, but picking all that, Gramsci came up with a concept called cultural hegemony. So that means it's a very beautiful concept. You must understand that when the West, whether it could be America or the European continent, when they invaded a certain country in the East and they made it their colony, their vision or their ambition was just not limited to politics or economic control of that particular area. Their hidden desires were culturally based, in the sense they wanted not only to ruin the culture of those areas, and they established their culture over them, but to show the world that because they belong to a very inferior culture, it was their responsibility as the so-called disciplined or so-called developed countries to go and establish a kind of a humanitarian atmosphere there, because somehow in some way they considered the Eastern as not more than mere beasts. So these are the kind of things that are mentioned in the Oriental authors. So now what he did, he explained the hegemony. The Gramsci was almost in Italy. He was suffering Mussolini and he was imprisoned, and from there he had gave to the world this concept culturally. This high time you should be aware of what is happening with your culture. And now he says, when the moment a colonizer enters his colony with the ambition of cultural destruction, what he does, he converts all the major institutions like schools, temples, mosques, churches, government offices. The British culture is first dominated there in those areas. So it is the responsibility of those colonized people under the colonized to propagate that to the lower sections of society. So not only the language but also the culture, literally imprinting in the minds of the native people that it was by destiny, by fate, and it was because of the geographical conditions that they had become so underdeveloped. So provided they pick up their culture, they could also match because of the skin, maybe because of the color, because of the so-called language that they had and the shrewdness they had. Can you imagine the strengths, the population of the Eastern countries? A small group of the Westerns, small group of a Western lord goes and attacks and immediately takes hold of the entire country or so much of population. You need to have a critical approach. How was that possible? They were very shrewd, and their willpower was that they used to make the natives rule the natives for the benefit of the colonizers. So this is what in India we call divide and rule policy, but this is a far-fetched policy that we find in the concept of cultural hegemony. This is what Edward said, studied deeply and wrote. This is what you have in the book Orientalism. And then what is this Foucault's power knowledge concept? Power hyphen knowledge. What is this? Means all the knowledge that is there in the world, just not any Occidental or Oriental, all the knowledge that is there in the world. What is this knowledge? All the books that have been written in the world belonging to so many languages, especially highlighting the English language. These books were not written by authors themselves having inspired their own souls. There was a power functioning over them. It was all deliberately written. Nothing was so intuitively written. All the knowledge that we have, the books that are there for our curriculum, or the books that are there as best sellers today, have all a kind of political control over them. Knowledge is equal to politics, and vice versa. Politics is equal to knowledge. Whatever the political people or the people belonging to the higher sections of the society or people belonging to religious sections, higher sections of religion, it is they together who decide what should be knowledge. So once that is decided there, so imagine the kind of work that the Orientalists have been doing in their books. So this is how the books come into the world. And since English belongs to the whole globe, so we naturally come to pick those books, read them, and if anything of that kind is written in those books, we literally accept, because that is the best-selling book, or that book is being accepted throughout the world. So knowledge is not that free. Knowledge is not a kind of a liberal thing. It's being controlled by the political leaders, especially by the West. So this theory, this is quite a big theory. We will discuss again it in some other video. But then Gramsci's cultural hegemony and Foucault's power knowledge was both taken into his book Orientalism. And there are some very sensitive issues mentioned in this book which I can't hold on to myself. I am going to discuss it in brief. Here Edward Said also speaks about certain wars that the history is known for. You have the Arab-Israel war, wherein the Americans supported supported Israel against Arab, and a total declaration, a very big declaration to the world that the Arab military policies are very barbaric and they are cowardly and they do not know warfare, and that is how the Israel had overtaken Arab in the war, so on and so forth. Kids, you have to read these things, which is quite controversial with Edward said. And he also mentions about the Russian-Afghanistan Cold War, wherein can you imagine, because of its enmity in those days, there were two big nations, big powers, one side America and one side USSR. There was a great fight. The whole world was divided into two sections. Now either should America dominate USSR or vice versa. So there came a time for the Americans to prove their power very wisely, and in the Russian-Afghanistan war, the Americans supported the Afghans. Supporting Afghans is supporting the Taliban almost. Almost in those days, supporting the terrorists. And soon after the Afghanistan defeated USSR, they waged a war against America. Can you imagine this? Can you imagine this? Americans had supported Afghanistan to destroy USSR, and the moment USSR was defeated in the war, the same Afghanistan who had received all kinds of ammunition from America attacked America. And you know the story of the devastation of the two world towers. This is how the story here, this is not the story, the fact builds into a story, and how well it is pictured outside. This is again another story. And you also have the case of Saddam Hussein, how America had a kind of its hand in coming to a justification as to what should be done with Saddam Hussein. Saddam Hussein had begged for life imprisonment. Those are different things. We are talking very big. Let us not be controversial. But I am talking of the Western powers here, that is there in Orientalism. This is not my own. So it was decided that Saddam Hussein be executed, be hanged. So according to Saddam Hussein's American lawyer, it was said that this decision of America was something beyond the international law. So no law on earth could control America in certain things. So these are the games of the so-called big powers, and this is how the big powers have come to suppress the East with their powers or hook or crook. So they're threefold kind of a working, threefold kind. First, political aggression, then amassment of the wealth, make the country more poorer, and then spread the culture there, so that lifelong, even after a republic, once the country becomes a republic, it will still follow the same age-old tradition. And India is also, what happened with India is also same with Macaulay's invention or introduction of modern education and introduction of English as medium of instruction back in 1833, 1834. The joining hands of Macaulay and Bentinck is what we have the English India today. So these are all very, very crucial, sensitive, and we have to have a lot of patience and understand as to what was what and what is happening with the world. So this Orientalism as a book was severely criticized by a person called Lewis. Both Lewis and Edward said at some point were at loggerheads, openly fighting, wherein Lewis, who belongs to the West, said, of course, what can a Palestine writer write about the West? He belongs to some Nazi conspiracy. This is how he has been produced his book. So this is kind, and then what answers did Edward said give him are all a kind of a beautiful study today. So now what have I come after telling you all this? What I'm going to tell you is that how the white considered its supremacy universal, not only in the colonial ages but also in the post-colonial ages through its texts. And so when we need to approach a text of Joseph Conrad or Swift, or it could be Rudyard Kipling, or it could be anybody, T.S. Eliot, we have to have a knowledge as to what kind of cultural hegemony is being said there. How do they talk of Indians there? So this is how we can do with this theory, Orientalism. There is nothing very good or nothing very bad about a modern theory. The only thing that the modern theory is doing is taking us back to the roots of a certain book. This is not bad because it will not only make us very critical in attitude, but also come to a kind of impartial justification over the book. And this is how even structuralism, post-structuralism or deconstruction has been doing. But the coming of Orientalism as a theory in English literature has opened our eyes very wide towards the arena, towards the horizons of literature in general. So this is just a brief note about Orientalism as a theory that I give. So in the coming videos we will pick some book and apply this theory and then study how it all goes on even today. But let me tell you, Edwards' book Orientalism, which was published in 1978, almost lost its controversial nature after the destruction of the world wars by the terrorists. So destruction of the World Trade Towers by the terrorists. So how and all it affected, so let's discuss in our coming videos. So at least you enjoyed a kind of a story in this session by the way of dealing with a certain theory. Thank you, students.